This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Africa. We're coming to live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. Let's take a look at what happened on the markets today. That nearly $2 trillion U.S. stimulus package continuing to be on market trade today. Major bourses rallied on that news. Here in Africa, Egypt's AGX 30 closed just over 0.2% higher. South Africa's JSE also closed in positive territory, boosted mainly by gold mining, which jumped almost 1.5%. However, Kenya's NSE and Nigeria's Old Share bucked that upswing, both closed in the red. Let's now take a look at other news making headlines this hour. South Africa's records the first current account surplus in about 18 years. Nigeria's forex dropped by $1 billion, mounting pressure to Africa's largest economy. And the U.S. pledges new financing commitments for the Paris Agreement on climate change. Well, we begin the program tonight in South Africa, where the current account surplus narrowed to a better than expected 3.7% of GDP on the fourth quarter of 2020 from 5.9% in the third. According to the Reserve Bank of South Africa, the balance narrowed to a surplus of about $13 billion compared to the surplus of roughly $20 billion reported in the third quarter. Q3 surplus is the second largest that had been recorded. On an annual basis, the ratio to GDP switched to a surplus of 2.2% in 2020 from a deficit of 3% in 2019. This is the first annual surplus since 2002. South Africa's trade surplus was also narrowed from $30 billion in Q3 to $28 billion in Q4. Let's now turn over to news coming from Egypt. Egypt's central bank has announced a raft of measures aimed at supporting the real estate industry as it slowly recovers from the fallout caused by the pandemic. With the details, here's Yarsa Kim from Cairo.
Last year's lockdown measures imposed by the Egyptian government to curb the spread of the coronavirus pandemic has taken a huge toll on its real estate industry. Most construction companies in the North African state have needed financial support to continue with their operations amid a subsequent drop in sales caused by the economic recession that ensued in the industry. Ahmed Masoud is a real estate developer who has felt the brunt of this crisis.
The main problem is that the real estate companies depend on cash flow from clients to build the projects. There's a big drop in that area, especially from the Egyptians living abroad, who are big contributors to the market. Some developers had financial cushion to pay for their dues and continue construction during that period, but others couldn't face the recession and had to close down. This, I think, was the main reason for the central bank to intervene.
The latest initiative by the central bank is based on financing struggling real estate companies to pay installments on land they bought before and to continue building their projects. Authorities have also dispersed grants to finance housing projects built jointly by private sector companies and the state-owned entities. The aim is to stimulate the real estate market.
I think 2021 is the beginning of the rebound of the real estate. Any recession in the market, like the one we witnessed in 2020, is always followed by a big boom, then saturation, and a period of stability. The state is leading the process of supporting the sector during this difficult period, with major projects such as building many cities and undertaking huge infrastructure projects. This creates work for construction companies and sends positive messages to investors that there is growth and opportunities for expansion.
The central bank has also cut interest rates on bank certificates. This has pushed many Egyptians to invest their money in real estate instead of savings in banks. Experts say higher construction rates would re-employ millions of laborers who are out of work and help developers deliver housing units to their clients. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Let's now take a look at your corporate headlines. A prestigious U.S. magazine, Global Finance, which specializes in financial markets and investment banking, has named the African Development Bank as the best multilateral financial institution in the world for 2021. The bank received broad recognitions for its quick response to Africa's needs in wake of COVID-19 pandemic. The award is also a global recognition for the path-breaking efforts the African Development Bank has been pursuing as it transformed itself into Solutions Bank for Africa. Standard Bank Group has reported a slump in its full-year profits. Africa's largest bank reported a 51% decline in profit after taxes and other adjustments for the year through December 2020. Headline earnings per share dropped 43%, while bad debt provisions rose 2.6 times to about $1.3 billion. Standard Bank says any economic recovery from the pandemic in Africa would likely take until late this year or even 2022. Ride-hailing company Bolt has launched a new category on its platform meant to offer eco-friendly rides in Kenya. Dubbed Bolt Green, the new service is part of the company's efforts towards reducing its carbon footprint. The service will involve hybrid and electric cars for anyone that wishes to use them. With this, the firm hopes they will contribute to the fight against climate change. And finally, Rolls-Royce has reported a loss of $5.6 billion for 2020 as the jet engine maker's business was shaken by the pandemic. Air travel restrictions forced the FTSE 100 manufacturer to burn through about $6 billion in cash to keep afloat as revenues collapsed. Rolls-Royce expects to burn through less cash this year, predicting a travel upturn in the second half. The firm's shares were up 2.7% by mid-morning. And those were your corporate headlines. Let's now take a short break and return. More news, including Nigeria's forex reserves dropped by $1 billion, mounting pressure to Africa's largest economy. And how a sportswear label was born out of South Africa beverage company in crisis.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Naidoo. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. Well, let's go back to that top story from South Africa, where the current account surplus narrowed to a better than expected 3.7% of GDP in the fourth quarter of 2020 from 5.9% in the third. And joining us for more on that story is Dr. T.K. Poe, senior lecturer at the Wits University School of Governance. Thank you so much for joining us, Doctor. Well, let's just begin with this number, and it was an annual number, the first surplus since 2002. One could say the disruption of the supply chain globally due to the pandemic measures did play a role in what we saw happen in South Africa's trade surplus last year. But what do you believe was significant in factoring into that number?
No, evening, and thanks for having me. I think a contributing factor to this was the type of lockdown the South African government took. They were quite harsh in what they allowed into the borders and what they allowed out. So you can look at it in two ways. That the South African government firstly shut down the borders, and also what it took into the country. It was a huge bumper in the gold price and the agricultural sector, particularly the citrus fruits, which were a record yield in that year, and which yielded a lot of numbers, a lot of positive numbers for the South African government. So those for me are the two contributing factors. But I think as you probably read the numbers more, we really now do start to be able to see that the bigger question comes whether this is going to be sustainable in the long haul, and I think the numbers are showing that it might not quite be the case.
Dr. Poe, we do see that from Q4 numbers. We saw that the trade surplus did come under pressure there, narrowing from 5.9% to 3.7%. However, that figure was still better than expected. What do you expect for the first quarter of this year?
I think it'll still be a range, if not a bit lower, because we're now starting to see that I think, especially during Q4, that the South African government started to take a different turn as regards to the lockdown rules, meaning they started to allow a lot of imports to come in. But again, the types that usually come into South Africa are your high-end machinery, which is what we use for agricultural sector and especially agriculture. So again, it's going to be a staggered growth because as yet, the economy is yet to truly rebound. And by rebound, I think I'm speaking about the major projects that really make the country big infrastructure projects. That's not really take off. So it's going to be a staggered return, as in it's going to be a bit lower. It's going to start to narrow a bit, but it still possibly might still be a surplus. But again, I'm very doubtful that this is going to be the new normal for the South African economy.
Dr. Poe, thank you so much for all that. Dr. Poe is a senior lecturer at the Wits School of Governance. Well, Nigeria's forex reserves dropped by just over $1 billion in February as Africa's largest economy continued to experience low foreign inflows. A COVID-19 induced plunge in oil prices in 2020 amid rising import bills contributed to Nigeria's forex reserves coming under that pressure. Kelechi Mekalam reports.
Nigeria's foreign reserves stood at $36.19 billion at the beginning of February, then fell to $35.09 billion by the end of the month, a record $1.1 billion, according to data from the central bank, its lowest level in over 2 months. Experts blame the plunge on Nigeria's high drive for imports.
This is not unexpected. The new drop is not unexpected. It's been oscillating over the years, Sometimes it will go up, sometimes it will come down, but it's essentially a function of our trade activity.
Because our industrial base, our consumption pattern, and everything that has to do with economic activities in Nigeria seem to be almost exclusively driven by our foreign exchange earnings. We have to import so many things. What it then means is that each time you have a hit on your foreign exchange reserves, we begin to look at ways to reduce our consumption. When, as a matter of fact, what we ought to do is to take a long-term perspective to try and reduce our reliance on those consumption patterns. So it will always be significant and it will always impact almost every aspect of our economic activities.
The central bank says the plunge in its foreign reserve is nothing to worry about, as what's left is enough to serve the nation for the next 7 months. Nigeria is Africa's biggest crude oil producer. About 90% of its export earnings come from crude oil. But the nation still imports refined petroleum products as local refineries are worn and dated. Experts advise government to adopt a more proactive approach to boost the foreign reserve.
It is an invitation for us to be cautious really, about what we are going to be purchasing in terms of our overall, trade policy. What are the things that government should prioritize? How much effort should we put into looking inwards? What is our policy towards patronizing local content? If we continue to focus on foreign items, we know it's going to put more pressure on the naira, and when there's pressure on the naira, it will lose its value.
If you can lose $1 billion over such a short period, and against the current scenario, by current scenario, I'm talking of the various factors in the economy, in the society, including the all-important security issues. You can lose billions just like that. And therefore, yes, 7 months seems to be double what the international criteria is. But it might not just be enough. And so, on that basis, I think there's cause for worry.
The central bank assures that it will continue efforts to boost and conserve the foreign reserve. Some measures include the reward policy that encourages formal diaspora remittances, targeting intervention schemes to support local production and growth of non-oil exports. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, it's a scenario we see or hear of often. Businesses scaling down or completely shutting down due to the financial pressures brought about by the pandemic. However, we also hear of businesses that have found opportunity in the crisis by creating different offerings to meet customer demand, or those who found completely new ways of operating to stay alive. Some of those new ways of operating have led to new business ventures, as was the case for Sammy Mohaule, an award-winning entrepreneur from South Africa. When COVID measures hit in South Africa, Sammy's beverage company Skyroll took an enormous knock. Sales plummeted as shoppers scaled back and spend and retailers' demands changed. But for Sammy, there was no giving in. The lessons he learned during COVID inspired him to launch an entirely new venture, sportswear label Kicks. I spoke with Sammy for more on his change of business strategy and what that has led to.
What I wanted to do was to create a brand that Africans can affiliate it with, as well as I wanted to create a brand that will be a feel-good sports brand that will be from Africa, for Africans, and for everyone. So the whole vision is to literally set up a brand that will literally dominate the world.
I want to speak a little bit about what inspired this new business, because it is a different venture from Skyroll, your beverage company, which you've won awards for. And you were saying to me that one of the things that inspired Kicks was what you saw through the period of COVID, and seeing that your sales plummet when it came to Skyroll because of all the measures that were being taken on because of COVID, and how you wanted to be in direct control of your value chain. So just speak to us about how that fed into creating this new business.
So when COVID-19 happened, we have been planning for a new sports drink that will be launching in the market. But when COVID-19 happened, it literally sort of like slowed down our sales in Skyroll drinks. So we've then had to go back to the drawing board and do things differently and look for other avenues that we can literally re-enter the market. And part of that planning was to reintroduce a sports drink. While we're doing that, introduce also the apparel as well as sneakers. And during the lockdown level 5 in South Africa, what I found was people, they were very energetic, exercising at home, you know, being active. But what I found was, especially women that are not necessarily, fit. They would not necessarily find the right fit for the right T-shirt, for the right tie. And the idea came on to myself that, why don't we create an apparel as well as sneakers that can literally target these markets, as well as making sure that we're keeping up with our sky rule and creating a brand and literally linking the two companies and making sure that they coincide.
This has been a very difficult time, particularly for businesses. Some of them have shut down and probably just will struggle a lot to reopen if they can't even continue. And yet here you are starting a completely new venture and seeing opportunity. How did that come about? And I also want to talk a little bit about funding sources for this new venture of yours.
In every distress situation, whether it's your tsunami, whether it's COVID-19, as an entrepreneur, I need to find a solution that I can literally introduce into the market and, try to help where I can. And that's what we do as entrepreneur. And in terms of finding capital for this venture, when we started, there was no funding, there was no capital that was injected by anybody or any venture capitalist. What has happened was I had to put up my own money that I've saved, that I had thought that, maybe in the next coming 5 years, I will do something for myself. But, when the entrepreneurial bug has literally hit you, you just reinvest into the good stuff that you see.
So now with this new brand that you've begun, how do you plan to balance those two, the online platform, but also the very difficult arena of being bricks and mortar, especially after what we've seen of people moving more to shopping online?
The consumer behavior has changed, and during COVID-19, it's even shifted even further. So in terms of where we are in the African market, in terms of the online platform, we are moving into the right direction, but we cannot ignore that market that still wants to walk into the store and feel the product.
What your projections are in terms of job creation, and I know you're very passionate about mentorship when it comes to this new venture with Cakes.
So I'm very passionate about skilling women as well as young people, youth. And last year, October, we then launched our 1,000 job creation. And what that does is I've taken 10 young people that have started my mentorship beginning of February. What we've said, we want it to be a platform where employment can be created, but as well at the same time, you're creating a platform where entrepreneurship can be laid forward. And with these young people, what we've said to them, you've got to have the passion to start your own business. You've got to have an idea. At the end of the 12 months, you have to be able to run your own business. We don't want them to be coming to our offices and working. At the end of the day, they become an employee. We want them to be creating and becoming a link of what we're calling the 1,000 job creation that we have started. And when we talk about these 1,000 jobs that we want to create over the next 2 years, it's not necessarily about us as a company creating all of those jobs, but it's also to create a platform as well as the links for other partners to create those jobs.
The coronavirus pandemic has been an unprecedented period in recent history, with reports of many lives lost, ravaged economies, and a state of collective pressure. Many nations have been keen on a vaccine that could slow down the disease. While several vaccines began production last year, when it comes to distribution and availability to poor nations, a new challenge is threatening to derail the collective fight against COVID-19. CGTN's Linda Mtangana takes a look at the rise of vaccine nationalism and Africa's position in the scramble for the few available doses.
For over a year now, Africa's healthcare systems have been stretched thin by the coronavirus pandemic. Over 100,000 people across the continent have succumbed to the disease, many of them doctors and nurses. With a second wave now spreading through parts of Africa, experts agree the only way to firmly end this pandemic is through widespread vaccination campaigns. Unfortunately, the majority of Africans may wait up to 2 years to receive their doses. In this episode of Panorama Africa, we take a look at unequal access to vaccines and life-saving medicines in Africa. It's another busy morning at the Hiwatele oxygen plant here in Nairobi. Since 2014, this social enterprise has been quietly supplying oxygen to patients in public and private health facilities across Kenya. But it wasn't until the coronavirus pandemic that the country's health sector really paid attention to what happens here.
The most memorable time was around October, November last year, 2020. That's when the mortality was quite high. We had hospitals coming to this plant and basically fighting for oxygen.
Hiwatele had to boost production dramatically.
We had to hire more people so that we could produce 24/7. We had to expand our distribution infrastructure by leasing more trucks and importing more canisters, the cylinders, to allow us to meet the demand of the market. Basically, if we compare our pre-COVID and at the height of COVID, the demand doubled.
Though Kenya may have been spared the worst of the pandemic, Dr. Olayo and other experts are hoping vaccines will help ease the pressure on the country's healthcare system. Kenya has already received its first batch of just over 1 million AstraZeneca vaccines. A total of 24 million doses will be administered across the country in a 3-phase rollout. The first phase has already begun, targeting health workers, teachers, and those in the security sector. Most Kenyans could be vaccinated by 2022, but the timelines are much worse in other parts of Africa, with full rollout expected to be completed by late 2023, if at all. So why isn't Africa receiving the vaccines it needs? Let's take a look at how vaccines get to Africa. Most low-income countries will rely on COVAX, the WHO initiative aimed at securing 6 billion doses of vaccines for poorer countries. COVAX will only cover 20% of the population of each country. The first 2 billion doses will be administered in 2021, primarily to healthcare workers. The challenge is COVAX must first procure these vaccines, and this is getting harder as richer nations race ahead of poorer ones buying up crucial supplies. Canada has pre-ordered enough vaccines to inoculate its population 5 times over. The UK and the US have bought enough vaccines for 4 per person, while the EU and Australia will have 2 each. Consequently, the African Union has entered into bilateral agreements directly with vaccine manufacturers, successfully procuring 270 million doses of vaccines for the continent. But it's hardly enough for Africa's 1.3 billion people. Furthermore, these agreements tend to be more expensive. South Africa paid 2.5 times more than European countries for the AstraZeneca vaccine. To make matters worse, these orders have been complicated by export controls introduced by the European Union. This mechanism gives countries the power to deny authorization for vaccine exports if existing contracts within the EU have not been met. An alternative, as advocated by South Africa and India, is to push the World Trade Organization to allow for any patents related to COVID-19 vaccines to be waived. This means that anyone, anywhere, would be allowed to manufacture the vaccines quickly and cheaply.
It's in essence a very, very fair and very reasonable demand to say, listen, during the duration of the COVID-19 pandemic, we all need to be able to manufacture what can help us get out of the pandemic.
The proposal has received the support of the African Union, but has met stiff opposition from some of the world's wealthiest countries, including the European Union, the United States, and Switzerland, all of whom are home to major pharmaceutical companies.
It goes against the language, of course, of equitable vaccine distribution. So we can, of course, only speculate as to why they don't want to support the waiver, but the consequence, in essence, is that they don't want to share, and that's perhaps the reason. They don't want to share the ability and technology to manufacture vaccines.
It's a sad situation for the global health community because you'd imagine that this would be the only time when people's lives would matter more than profits. Even Kenya as a country has capacity to reconstitute and develop these vaccines if that patent was waived. We can do it quickly, and that would be the best way, produce and deploy quickly within the country.
Sadly, it's not the first time that Africa finds itself facing unequal access to life-saving medical treatments. In 1998, 39 international pharmaceutical companies sued the South African government over its attempt to buy cheap HIV medicines from India, rather than expensive antiretroviral drugs from the United States. Though the case was eventually dropped due to public pressure, the damage had already been done. Delays in procuring affordable ARVs resulted in many unnecessary deaths.
During a time of pandemic, it cannot be left to the market forces, to the monopolies of a few pharmaceutical manufacturers, to determine the availability and secondly, the price, in this case, of vaccines and in the past of ARVs. If we are reliant on the rest of the world, wherever that is, to supply our vaccines, Africa is going to be last in line again. And that is what we're seeing now with regards to COVID-19 vaccines.
The pandemic has exposed and exploited the inequalities of our world. There is now real danger that the very tools that could help to end the pandemic, vaccines, may exacerbate those same inequalities. Vaccine nationalism might serve short-term political goals, but it's ultimately short-sighted and self-defeating. We will not end the pandemic anywhere until we end it everywhere.
Vaccine nationalism happens when governments sign deals with drug manufacturers, especially the ones in their own countries, to exclusively supply the necessary medicines to their own populations, as is the case with COVID-19 vaccines. The world has also witnessed cases where governments push their companies to be granted exclusive rights to supply medicines during disease outbreaks, like the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. The Democratic Republic of Congo has also been a theatre of similar events, as the Ebola outbreak continues taking grim twists and turns. Companies from Asia, America and Europe competed to supply their vaccines to the Great Lakes nation. In the race for a COVID-19 vaccine, some African governments and private researchers were part of the groundbreaking medical achievements recorded, but it seems Africans were less appreciated as the bragging rights ended up in Western capitals. For example, Phase 3 trials of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine were conducted on South African citizens in October 2020. In November, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine was tried on 400 volunteer Kenyan health workers. But when it comes to the acquisition and procurement of these drugs, it seems Africa is left playing second fiddle.
According to me, try it first on animals, see how it reacts, then and if it is okay, we will accept it.
My work has been affected, but if it is possible for everyone to be vaccinated, people will be free with life, freedom of movement, freedom to do their activities without the corona restrictions. That is my hope. I'm eagerly waiting for the vaccine.
I'll not get vaccinated and I'll not allow my family to do it. What if it has side effects? They could be revealed after many years. I don't trust new commercial vaccines.
I'm very scared, so I don't think I'll take it now due to what I'm hearing from people.
I'll take it because there's no problem taking it, and to protect myself and protect others.
Dr. Olayo believes more needs to be done to address skepticism and misinformation.
So it's our responsibility as a public health community to educate the public and to explain to them the merits of vaccination. There are so many vaccines coming in. How different is AstraZeneca from Pfizer and from Johnson & Johnson? This is deep science that an average Joe will not understand. So you need, and he's supposed to take that vaccine and to bring his kids to take that vaccine. So we need to educate them.
A year on, the disruptive nature of the coronavirus pandemic has become the new normal, though there are some countries that are yet to embrace the importance of fighting on one front against this common enemy. So as long as vaccine nationalism dictates the means, COVID-19 shall be the end.
Well, let's now take a short break and return. The U.S. pledges new financing commitments for the Paris Agreement on climate change. And the UK and European Union are trading blows again, this time over coronavirus vaccines.
No one again began holding guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
The Excellency, thank you very much for your time now. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Let's recap on news making headlines this hour. In Nigeria's Kaduna State, authorities report that 13 people were killed by unknown gunmen. Such insurgencies have become popular in the region, including a recent kidnapping of 300 students. The state's authorities say that so far 2,000 people have been killed or abducted by criminal gangs. In Côte d'Ivoire, Ivorians are mourning the loss of Prime Minister Hamed Bakayoko. He was flown to France on February the 18th for medical examinations and later to Freiburg in Germany, where he died undergoing treatment for cancer. Bakayoko was a close ally to President Alassane Ouattara, who was appointed Prime Minister in July of last year. And finally, civil society organizations in Africa have urged rich nations to end the blockade of intellectual property rights to allow formal negotiations at the World Trade Organization. The call comes as governments prepare to meet for another round of talks at the WTO. And those were news-making headlines this hour. Well, the U.S. Special Envoy for Climate, John Kerry, has confirmed that the world's biggest economy would lay out new financing commitments for the Paris Agreement to cut greenhouse gas emissions. Kerry announced the pledge after talks with French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire. While in Paris, a former U.S. Secretary of State also met with French President Emmanuel Macron. They discuss climate change as well. John Kerry is in Europe this week to relaunch transatlantic cooperation in the wake of President Biden's decision to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord.
We can work together with France and its leadership and all of Europe and other centers of finance to be able to bring people together to harness the commitment of the marketplace to be a big partner in achieving this goal. No one nation can do this on its own. No one government can possibly do it on its own.
Nous voulons que la finance.
We want finance to make itself fully available to the fight against global warming. We'd like to thank all the financial institutions, both private and public, which have already committed themselves to this green finance, particularly at the instigation of the President of the Republic. We believe that it is the nerve of the climate war. Finance is the nerve of the climate war.
Finance, c'est le nerf de la guerre.
Well, the U.S. House of Representatives has approved the final version of President Biden's $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief package. The bill provides funds for stimulus checks worth $1,400 to most Americans. It also provides $350 billion to support state and local governments, as well as increased funding for vaccine distribution and testing. An extension of unemployment benefits and an expansion of the child tax credit are also included. This marks one of the largest economic stimulus measures in U.S. history. The White House says President Biden is expected to sign the bill on Friday. Well, CGTN's White House correspondent Nathan King has more details on that from the U.S. Capitol.
The motion is adopted.
It's a really big deal. At nearly $2 trillion, it's the biggest stimulus, even bigger, studies say, than in the Great Depression era of the New Deal. It sends $1,400 checks to millions of Americans, extends federal unemployment money, changes the tax code to help poor families with children, and targets hundreds of billions of dollars in aid for state, local governments, health care, and COVID relief. It's a huge victory for Joe Biden in his first 7 weeks as U.S. president, and for Democrats in Congress who hold power and now the purse strings in Congress.
This is a momentous day in the history of our country because we have passed historic, consequential, and transformative legislation.
It passed, as it did in the Senate, along party lines. Not the bipartisanship President Biden says he was looking for, but the White House says it was bipartisan because most of the country wants it, as well as many Republican state governors.
The so-called relief bill.
The Republicans complained this is not a COVID relief bill, but a wish list of Democratic and progressive priorities rammed through with little debate.
I think this is actually one of the worst pieces of legislation I've seen pass here in the time I've been in the Senate. We believe that the American people need to learn more and more about it. And we're going to see that they do that in the coming months as we talk repeatedly about the provisions in the bill that the Democrats do not want to discuss.
President Biden will take a victory lap on Friday as he signs the bill into law, one of his key priorities passed in his first 50 days in office. And there's another shot in the arm for the Biden administration and the long-suffering American people. Joe Biden announcing that 100 million extra doses of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine will be available before the summer. It's quite incredible how quickly the vaccine is now rolling out. 3 million doses a day is not uncommon. And while we have to worry about the virulent variants that are still spreading across this country, hospitalizations are down, deaths are down, and after a year of real worry and record deaths and cases in the United States, there may be light at the end of the tunnel. Nathan King, CGTN, at the US Capitol.
The UK and European Union are trading blows again, this time over coronavirus vaccines. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has hit back at claims from Brussels that the UK has banned the shipment of COVID-19 vaccines abroad. As Tony Waterman reports, it's the latest clash between the two as the EU-UK post-Brexit relationship continues to fracture.
Boris Johnson hit this accusation head-on Wednesday when he was in Parliament taking Prime Minister's questions. He said claims that Britain is blocking the export of vaccines abroad is simply not true, and that the UK should be proud of its vaccination program, with a third of the population now having received a first dose.
Let me be clear, we have not blocked the export of a single COVID-19 vaccine or vaccine components. This pandemic has put us all on the same side in the battle for global health. We oppose vaccine nationalism in all its forms.
Brussels, meanwhile, was remarkably mum on this latest clash with the UK over vaccine exports. The silence perhaps even more noticeable because it was contrasted so sharply to the unusually blunt accusation from the council chief, Charles Michel, mincing no words in a newsletter Tuesday afternoon, saying that the UK and the US had an outright ban on vaccine exports and vaccine components. The facts don't lie, is what he wrote in that newsletter. And this highly charged claim sparked anger across the channel. The EU's envoy was summoned by the British government to come and explain this situation, but even that was tinged with post-Brexit tension. The EU only sent a deputy to the Wednesday morning meeting because the UK has yet to grant Europe's ambassador full diplomatic status. One EU official saying in a WhatsApp message, rather bitingly, that it's less convenient if the UK wants to summon the ambassador if there isn't one. Now, Charles Michel walked back the claims a bit in a late-night tweet, saying there are different ways of imposing bans or restrictions on vaccines and medicines, but this incident marks just the latest clash in souring post-Brexit relations. EU diplomats have now reportedly backed Brussels' plan to take legal action against the UK for unilaterally extending the grace period on checks to food entering Northern Ireland in a breach of the Brexit divorce deal. And some reports suggest that the move could influence whether Brussels grants the UK equivalents on financial services, which are, of course, a major contributor to the UK economy, but something not included in the Brexit trade deal. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Brussels.
Policymakers, companies, and universities are all working together in the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau Greater Bay Area to transform it into a global innovation hub. CGTN's Huang Fei met with the people shaping the future of China's smart economy.
An old industry with a new twist. Self-storage meets the Internet of Things. Hong Kong entrepreneur Felix Wong created this fast-growing startup in Guangzhou, replacing conventional locks with mobile access. And business is on the up. With the city's property prices doubling in recent years, people and companies need cheaper places to put their stuff. A burgeoning class of small online retailers are also using them for last-mile deliveries. But much of the company's success has to do with geography.
All of our facility and equipment are all procured within Greater Bay region. There's many IoT hardware suppliers and tech providers in this region. So it's very crucial for our startup to have this kind of skeleton or this kind of backup resources within the region to have a higher successful rate of startup.
The company has expanded to 20 locations in Guangzhou and Shenzhen in 3 years, thanks to generous subsidies from the Hong Kong government and a slew of incentives here on the mainland. Felix works from this incubation base in Guangzhou. It's a one-stop shop for Hong Kong and Macau entrepreneurs looking to tap into a regional market of 70 million consumers.
New startups have to jump through a lot of hoops, from corporate tax and hiring to legal paperwork. Here we have professionals from the government to help them troubleshoot. We want to make sure their businesses can grow here in a way that's sustainable and healthy.
So what's in it for the mainland? Hong Kong's expertise in financing and conducting international business is a key advantage. Guangdong also wants to leverage Hong Kong's experience in research and education, especially when it comes to high-tech engineering. This university has been sowing the seeds for a rising advanced manufacturing sector. This robotics lab is the beating heart of future innovation. It's connecting top education resources from Hong Kong University with a wealth of industry opportunities here in the Greater Bay Area. Students are mentored by experts on both sides. Many of graduates have gone on to work for leading companies or start their own businesses. The university says it adds more than 10,000 recruits to the local engineering workforce every year, more than anywhere else in Guangdong.
To train innovators and visionaries that meet industry demands, we need to introduce innovative approaches. Our Robotics Academy is a great example. Our graduates are very well paid and well sought after. If we keep this up, Guangdong's future as a manufacturing powerhouse is guaranteed.
For Felix, the future is where the market is. He encourages more people in Hong Kong to step out of their comfort zone to experience firsthand the full potential of China's economic growth. Hong Fei, CGTN, Guangzhou.
Well, let's not take a look at how commodity prices fared today. It was not a good day for gold, platinum, or silver. All came under pressure in trade, but copper bucked that negative sentiment in the sector. It was up just over 2%. Brent crude continuing to see some recovery. It went up almost 1.4%. Let's now take a short break and return. A Nigerian engineer converts PET plastic bottles into houses.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Well, like everywhere else in the world, plastic waste is a huge environmental challenge in Nigeria. Experts in Africa's most populous nation are constantly seeking the best means to address the challenge. Tonight, CGTN's Deji Batmos brings you the story of one Nigerian engineer and renewable energy expert that's using PET plastic bottles to build homes. With his story, here's Deji Batmos on Grassroots.
From this to this, it's a remarkable innovation and a clear demonstration of how one of the most troubling waste materials in the environment could be recycled to solve Nigeria's housing deficit crisis. It's the very first eco-friendly all-plastic house in Nigeria. The primary material, discarded PET plastic bottles, which litter everywhere in the country. The bottles are packed with sand, arranged on top of one another, and tied with strings before they are bound together with mud. The man behind the innovation says it is earthquake-proof and can adapt to any climate.
It's a very good solution, really, for a lot of people, the low and medium income people. It doesn't biodegrade, it doesn't change, it doesn't do anything. So at least you are sure this one, you come back 250 years later, you will find it as it is. And concrete blocks will not last that long. If this is a cement block building, when you enter it, you start sweating, you run outside again. Because it's too hot, it's like an oven. You need AC or this. Here, maximum, you need a ceiling fan. You don't even need it. Because the walls are thick and the sand is a poor conductor of heat, so the heat remains outside. On the other way, in the cold season, the inside remains warm when it's very, very cold outside.
Ahmed says it took 17,000 PET bottles to put up the structure. And so far, he and his group of experienced technicians have trained about 56 youths to become PET bottle masons.
We get some of these street boys and pay them, ask them to bring us the bottle, so we pay them per dozen. And they found it even is better for them than the begging they are doing on the street and this. And we've trained some of them. So we've trained them to be able to read a small map, a small sketch, and know how to measure some distances on the sketch and translate it to reality on the ground. And some of them have become our best trainers.
Nigeria has a huge plastic waste challenge, generating at least 2.5 million tons of it annually. Most of the plastic waste is discarded PET bottles, which often flood the streets when it rains. Ahmed believes the plastic house innovation could help address the problem and increase interest in plastic recycling.
You have removed a certain quantity of those bottles from the waste dump, eventually preventing it from getting into the ocean, where they break down to pieces and are eaten by aquatic animals, mostly fishes. And we also catch these fish and they come on our table. So it's a sort of, it enters the food chain, which is very, very dangerous.
With the cost of building materials on a continuous rise in Nigeria, the plastic house is certainly another option to consider. But beyond being an option, it's also a solution to one of the environmental crises the world is currently contending with. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Kaduna, Nigeria.
Well, let's take a look at how currencies did on the markets today. A weaker dollar buoyed most currencies we track here. South Africa's rand gained just over 1% against the greenback, closing at almost 15 rands to the dollar. Nigeria's naira gained almost 0.4%, while Kenya's shilling remained virtually flat, with Egypt's pound closing at 15.70 to the dollar. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business. Remember that you can send your feedback to contacts on the screen and follow us on digital media platforms. From me, Hannah Viviers, and the rest of the Global Business team, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again next time.